What's up, everybody? Welcome on into the Slate. Good to be with you. A Thursday sports edition. And with that, we are going to really bounce around. We'll hit Major League Baseball playoffs, maybe some NBA futures in a little bit. And of course, Thursday night football, which we're going to save for the back half of the show, in part because Jeff Ulrich is joining us then, and also because, well, of the matchup. It's Washington, Chicago. It's just not exciting at all. But it's football, and we like football. I'm Adam Kaufman, Gary and Thorne. I like him, too. How are you, Gare Bear?
Doing great. Good to be with you, Koff.
All right. I know that, look, we're both big baseball fans, but you really dive into baseball when it comes to not only daily fantasy, but obviously sports betting. Now, unfortunately, I thought we were going to have a Yankees-Guardians game to look ahead to tonight, but with the weather situation there in the Bronx, that game has been moved to tomorrow afternoon. The Yankees up 1-0 in that series. So there's just the one game today, and it's in progress right now. As our own Steve Buchanan would say, or Jared Carrabis for that matter, America's team, the Seattle Mariners, up 2-1 in Houston at the moment. And of course, you know, the Astros, a popular pick not only to reach but win the World Series. How you feeling about this series, and how you feeling about this game?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy the swings you have in these 5-game series. I mean, I think I was on Tuesday on the slate, and you know, the Mariners were up 6-2 in the 5th inning, and we were talking about how, wow, the Mariners, what a significant advantage they could have in this series. Not only have they appeared to win game 1, but they'll have Luis Castillo taking them out for game 2. Yeah, it is sort of interesting, just with how this 5-game series sort of plays out, with the fact that, you know, a potential game 5 would be on Monday, which sort of, it really starts asking the tough questions. Like, if we have to go to a game 5, would Seattle be pitching Robbie Ray? Would Seattle be pitching Luis Castillo on short rest? You know, there's a lot of variables in the air with these short series. I do still think the Astros have a pretty good advantage here. Winning game 1 is just such a massive deal in a short series like this. And for as much pitching depth as the Mariners have, and they really do have a ton of pitching depth, especially if some of these guys continue to elevate as they have so far in the first couple rounds of the playoffs. But you know, the Astros, even in a game 3, get Lance McCullers going to the mound. So I still think they have the advantage. I know it's easy analysis to just be like, well, Seattle should have won game 1, but Seattle should have won game 1. Because if you're heading into game 2 with Luis Castillo throwing 100 on the mound, up 1-0, we're seeing it play out right now. They could have very easily had the Astros on the brink.
This goes back to, I believe, last Friday's show when I was on. Jeff Ulrich was here, and Matt LaMarca as well. We were given our predictions going into the baseball playoffs. And at that point in time, it was the wild card round. And just, you know, how are we feeling and who are your World Series picks and all that, you know, challenged by our producer, Eamon, who's here with us again today. Jeff and I, just to be bold, we both threw out San Diego Padres to reach the World Series. And obviously we saw what happened there with the Mets in the wild card round. Now they're, you know, doing pretty well here in the divisional round. That's not a transition in talking about the Padres. It's more just whether it's Seattle or somebody else, do you see that sort of, you know, team of destiny, for lack of a better way of putting it, or that team that's going to come out of nowhere? Like, is Seattle capable, with everything you just outlined, of shocking Houston and really doing something special this year?
I still think they don't have enough offense. I still think when you look at this lineup, there are some pretty major holes, particularly just, you know, batting average. I know, look, it's funny for me to say that, considering how far I lean into the analytics community when it comes to baseball, but at a certain point, getting hits matters. And the Mariners are just not a team that consistently gets hits. I mean, this is still a ball club that across the last 2 seasons, I believe they became the first team in MLB history to lead the league in 1-run wins in back-to-back seasons. Like, that level of, I don't want to say luck, because you do have to put yourself in good situations for that stuff to happen, but that level of good fortune in close games does not tend to continue at the level we have seen for the Mariners. And a big reason they continue to be in these tight games is their offense can go cold very quickly. So I think if you run into a New York Yankees team in the American League Championship Series, I think if you run into an Atlanta Braves or a Los Angeles Dodgers in the World Series, that particular deficiency is going to come up time and time again, despite how good Seattle's pitching could be. Because again, we're putting a lot of pressure on very young arms who have not really pitched all that much at this level. And then you've got Robbie Ray, who is sort of deteriorating in front of our eyes right now. So I think the Mariners do have some flaws. The Padres are interesting. If they're able to slay the big bad Dodgers, I think it goes without saying, but that really sort of opens up that side of the bracket.
Sure.
And the Padres, I think game 3 is really interesting tomorrow. I think, you've got a situation where right now they are plus 105 on the money line as home underdogs. Blake Snell has sort of under the radar been one of the best pitchers in the National League the last 2 months. He is looking like the American League Cy Young version of Blake Snell we saw a couple years back, where his strikeout rate is hovering up around 35, 36%. That's just, that level of contact suppression is always going to be valuable. And then you've got a Dodgers team that, despite the fact, despite this overwhelming payroll, this embarrassment of riches they continue to have year after year, they're going into game 3 with a very uncertain plan at pitcher. Dave Roberts came out today and said that Tony Gonsolin probably gives them about 75 pitches. He's not fully built up. They'll have Dustin May available out of the bullpen. They'll have, all arms on deck. But for a Dodgers team that is overwhelmingly the World Series favorite to essentially be utilizing a bullpen game in game 3 of the National League Division Series, it's sort of mind-blowing when you really stop and think about it. And I think Gonsolin is another one of those pitchers who I have some, maybe not serious questions. It's really hard to be too negative about a guy who had an ERA hovering around 2 for most of the season, but his BABIP is so incredibly low. And it's not as if he's someone who is particularly good at limiting opposing hard contact or, having an extremely high fly ball rate, which sometimes also suppresses BABIP throughout, 100, 200 inning sample. He really just seems like someone who got really, really lucky and is probably more of a 3.5 ERA pitcher than a guy with a 2.14. So between the weird bullpen stuff, the limitations, the fact that, again, Blake Snell's been fantastic, I think I kind of like the Padres to go up 2-1 in this series in game 3. Again, home underdog in the playoffs with the better pitcher. That's a pretty tantalizing combination.
Just circling back a few minutes, don't think I didn't hear you, lipstick on a pig, dressing up good fortune in place of luck, saying essentially the same thing. It's the middle class has luck. The upper class has good fortune.
Look, anything I say about the Mariners is going to be construed as sour grapes. So I was trying to be a little bit more elegant about it.
There you go.
Coming back from 7-run deficits is not a sustainable way to win in the playoffs. Let's just say that.
That's fair. Yes. Garen's beloved Blue Jays no longer part of the postseason, not unlike, of course, the Tampa Bay Rays and maybe soon enough the New York Yankees. This could just be a terrible showing for the American League East after the Orioles fell just short. The Red Sox had a terrible year after reaching the ALCS. How is this going to go? Looking ahead to what should have been tonight and is now tomorrow, this Yankees Guardian series. What are you expecting in game 2?
Well, pretty much anything negative I just said about the Mariners, you can multiply by 7 when we're talking about the Guardians. They have better pitchers, a better bullpen, and an even worse offense. The Guardians are a team that throughout the season sort of came at you in waves. They had the lowest strikeout rate in the entirety of the league, the highest contact rate in the entirety of the league, a lot of speed, a lot of youth. They take the extra base, they hustle. That stuff's great across 162 games. But for as much as people like to sort of disparage the home run and its importance in the playoffs, when you're dealing with pitchers of this caliber, not only starting every game, but coming out of the bullpen every single inning, it's just really hard to string 4 or 5 singles together to put up a crooked number if you're the Cleveland Guardians. And it creates a situation where suddenly this team that had the second lowest isolated power in all of baseball, that did not hit home runs, 100% of their runs in the playoffs have been by the home run, which sounds great until you remember they don't hit a lot of home runs. So suddenly they're averaging less than 1 run per game. The Yankees have some issues with their bullpen, granted, but I think their starting staff is incredibly deep, especially if Luis Severino is going to be the guy we saw across the last 2 months of the season, the guy who came off the IL looking like himself again. I just don't think the Guardians can score enough. I think it's interesting how low the total is in Friday's game. It is 6. The under is plus 100, probably as it should be, despite the fact that every Guardians game has hit the under, and it's not even been particularly close so far in the playoffs. I'm still kind of drawn to that number, as low as it is, because one thing Cleveland, hitting for home runs was poor as well, but another thing they did poorly throughout the entirety of the regular season, they could not hit left-handed pitching. They have among the lowest WOBA and WRC plus against southpaws of any team in baseball. Nestor Cortes should be really, really good in this matchup. And while Shane Bieber, might give up a scratch home run like we saw when he gave up one to Jose Siri in the first game of the wild card series, I think he's going to be pretty good too. So I think runs are going to be at a premium. If you're worried about the Yankee bullpen, maybe look into like a first 5 under and really kind of focus in on those starters. But at plus money, I know it's really, really small, but I kind of like the under 6.
So staying with baseball for a little bit longer, if we look ahead to the futures market based on what's going on right now, and let's pull that up on the DraftKings Sportsbook. We can obviously look at right now we're on World Series winners. We could look at league winners and NL straight forecasts an option as well. But with what we're looking at this moment, Astros again the betting favorites to win the World Series plus 300, narrowly ahead of the Dodgers at plus 310. Is there anything to be to take advantage of right now that you're seeing across the DraftKings Sportsbook in the baseball world?
I still think the Yankees are probably the bet I like the most. I mentioned this before the playoffs started. They were plus 550 at that point, but their draw was really advantageous. I think if you had polled Yankees fans prior to the playoffs starting and said, what would you like your path to be? Unanimously, they would have taken first round bye and we get the winner of Tampa Bay, Cleveland, preferably Cleveland, because I think there is that stigma Yankees fans have, along with, any fan of any American League East team that isn't the Rays, of having to play in Tampa or having to associate in any way with Tampa Bay and their weird witchcraft. But the Guardians, like I said, they just have the biggest deficiencies and the most obvious glaring holes of any team left in the playoffs. So the Yankees have the advantage there. And if the Mariners want to do their dirty work and, they're threatening here in the 6th inning, there's a chance that the Astros just aren't there waiting to slay the Yankees. And then you get into a situation where I don't want to say beating Seattle is a free pass. It's obviously not. If the Mariners get that far, they have a very good team. Again, their pitching is very deep, but the Yankees would rather face the Mariners than the Astros.
Sure.
So there's still a world here where the Yankees have their optimum path to the World Series. And then whoever's waiting for them is going to be very tough, obviously, but they're not going to be plus 425 against the Dodgers if that's what the World Series matchup is. So I still think there is some value in betting the Yankees. Aside from that, Padres at plus 950, just because, again, I think they could win game 3. If that's the case, you might as well bet them now. If you're someone who's kind of on board with that. To
that end too, do you think anyone, maybe you're not a believer in the Padres ultimately, and you think it's just a matter of time before the Dodgers do prevail, but did people miss the boat on the Padres? Like when Jeff and I, and we were saying it sort of, somewhat off the cuff than as a, it was more of a bold prediction than looking in our crystal ball when we were shouting out the Padres to reach the World Series. But, and again, this was going into the wild card round. So I think they had maybe the second worst odds of anybody in Major League Baseball at that point in time, because most people did expect the Mets to win and so on and so forth here. Did people miss the boat potentially on the Padres?
Plus 950 is still decent odds. You're going to regret if you didn't cash that ticket, or maybe you mulled over trying that ticket and you didn't take it, because you're right. You're never going to see odds like they were prior to that series against the Mets. But like I said, if you like the Padres and you don't bet them now and they do win game 3, this number is probably plus 600.
Sure.
On Saturday. So, there's still always time to buy in. I think they've got a pretty nice setup. My only concern right now, and this was kind of what I sort of illustrated before this series against the Dodgers started, was they need to win the next 2 games. And if anything, maybe the better bet for the short term, because I'm sure it's probably, I would guess maybe like plus 350, plus 400. If you want to go into series exact score, Padres 3-1. Because if this gets to a game 5, I don't think they win game 5. Because how this set up, them needing to use 3 games to beat the Mets in the first round. Let's see. Padre plus 300. Okay. So Mike Clevenger's terrible. He's just not himself right now. He was terrible down the stretch of the season. He's given up home runs left and right. But because they had to use their top 3 starters, because Joe Musgrove had to take the mound, shiny ears and all, on Sunday Night Baseball, it set up a situation where not only does Clevenger have to pitch game 1, he'd have to start game 5, or they'd have to turn to some combination of a bullpen game, maybe Darvish on short rest. But again, the options get worse and worse and worse, and Clevenger's not a great option to begin with. So if you're someone who has faith in the Padres, I still think the way they get this done is by winning this series in 4 games. So maybe your best bet, if you are a Padres backer, is just plus 300 for them to win this series in 4.
So before Jeff joins us in the next few minutes, I imagine anyway, let's sneak in a little bit of NBA while we have the time, because obviously the preseason is winding down. As you can see up on your screen right here on the DraftKings Sportsbook, opening night is coming up on Tuesday with a couple of games. My Celtics, the Sixers are in action. That's at the Garden. You'll have the defending champs, much as that burns my tongue to say, the Warriors and all of their drama against the Lakers. Should be a good matchup, if nothing else, obviously. A couple of good opening night games before the rest of basketball really kind of gets into full swing the next night here. I don't know if you have any specific thoughts on these 2 games. If not, that's fine. We can look at futures, obviously. But
yeah, unfortunately, not a ton of. We might have to go to a Julian hop in for some.
No, and that's totally fine here. Let me see what we have here.
Let's go with the championship futures here.
Yeah. So the Clippers, and this has been this way pretty much ever, and I'm not saying there's necessarily a direct correlation, but pretty much ever since the Ime Udoka scandal in Boston of the last few weeks. Yeah, I mean but it hasn't changed that much.
No,
the Celtics were at that point in time, if I remember right, on again the DK Sportsbook here, they were plus 550 to win the championship. They were the betting favorites overall. Now still at plus 600 with Joe Mazzulla, and you got the Clippers at the favorites at plus 550. The Warriors are right there at plus 600, tied with Boston. And then of course you have Brooklyn, Milwaukee, and so on and so forth. Phoenix to round out the top 5. It's just, I guess I don't want to make this about Boston, but something that did catch my eye just before we came on the show that I found interesting are the wide-ranging opinions of what is a very deep Eastern Conference to begin with. And of course that includes, the team that you love, the Toronto Raptors as well. Kevin Garnett, who is a champion in Boston, the guy bleeds green. He was doing that the one of the Showtime podcasts there, and was talking about who he expects to come out of the East, and he said that he doesn't even have the Celtics in the top 4. The teams that and this is Kevin Garnett, man. Like, he has in no particular order. He has the Nets, he has the Bucks, he has the Sixers, and he had the Cavs now with Donovan Mitchell, and the Celtics behind all of them. What's your thought on what, again, is an incredibly deep Eastern Conference?
So I will say this. If you had asked me to name what 4 teams I thought Garnett would have ahead of the Celtics, those were the exact 4 teams I would guess. Just because on paper, those are probably the 4 rosters that have the most talent outside of Boston. Now, Kevin Garnett would know better than most how sort of like locker room dynamics and players knowing their role and continuity and team dynamics sort of play into what makes a champion, which is why I do think the Celtics are still deserving of being one of the more favored teams in the league. I think there had to be at least a little reaction to what's been a pretty tumultuous month. I mean, really, even if you don't want to address the coaching stuff, just the fact that we have no idea when Robert Williams is going to be Robert Williams again.
And that was Garnett's main argument, is that you're not going to have one of the top defensive players in the entire NBA for potentially half the season.
And even when he comes back, I mean, this is becoming, I don't want to say degenerative, but knee issues in big men and repetitive knee issues are not generally a very good idea.
No, knees, feet, back, all problem areas with bigs.
Bad stuff. So I get the hesitation. However, it seems like an overreaction. I'll just say that. In general, I think when you're trying to bet championship futures for the NBA, and I think you kind of spelled it out perfectly, this is the season to maybe take some risks, because, you know, whether or not you like this version of the NBA or whether or not you like sort of the super team version of the NBA, back in those days, the odds were a lot, you know, tougher to kind of find value with, because you really did have a sense like, oh, why would I bet anyone but the LeBron James Heat? That just seems dumb. Why would I bet anyone but the Kawhi Spurs? That seems like a bad idea. Why would I bet anyone but the KD Steph Warriors? That's ridiculous. I'm just throwing away money. Where right now, this is probably the most open I can remember the league being in some time. Like, there is really, you could toss out 5 teams in each conference and say they are going to be the number 1 seed for their respective conference heading into the playoffs. And I go, yeah, there's a reasonable chance that happens. So I think with that, and in saying that, this is the most fun I've had with betting some like mid-tier futures in a long time, because I think there's some actual value here. In particular,
go ahead. Yeah.
76ers. I just think the 76ers at 15-1. I know there's the James Harden playoff ghosts. I know that'll come up at some point this season. It's hilarious how much credit he wants for taking less money to be on a contending team as a 34-year-old, like, aging player.
Yeah.
But when you really stack,
you know what,
it
though?
up, like,
he passed on real money. That's a fact.
He did. And, you
I'm
know,
not saying he needs it, but he passed.
We don't all get $1 million birthday gifts from rappers. But that might help, you know, sort of keep him afloat for a while.
Yeah.
But I look at it like this. Is there really that much of a difference in the top end talent, the top end outcome of the Nets, and the top end outcome of the 76ers? And even if we want to factor in that the Nets are just priced the way they're priced because they're the Nets, and there's so much turmoil and so much drama, and they're going to be a first take topic every single day. And the book kind of has to price them that way just to get some traction and get some action on that particular number. So let's say they're 10-1 if in a vacuum.
Sure.
I still think the 76ers have just as much top end talent. And the fact that they've gone out and added some like really proven playoff pieces, you know, PJ Tucker's value on a playoff team is almost immeasurable. Even if he is getting, you know, a little long in the tooth, he's definitely taken some beatings. But even someone like DeAndre Melton, I think he's a really nice 9th player, like this third guard coming off your bench. It's a really nice piece to have. Another year of development for Tyrese Maxey. I just think there's a lot to like with the 76ers team. And I'll say this, as you know, as a Raptors fan and getting to watch the 76ers in the first round of the playoffs last year prior to the Embiid injury, I know everyone likes to make fun of Tobias Harris. And I know it's fun to be like, wow, Tobias Harris makes $40 million. But when you're doing everything you can to stop Joel Embiid and to stop James Harden, and suddenly Tobias Harris is the guy who gets to stand alone in the corner and just hit wide open threes, he becomes a pretty scary guy, because that's essentially what you have to do to stop this team in the half court. So the problems they present, the problems they create, I think the 76ers should really be more in that Nets tier of pricing as opposed to where they are now. And I also kind of like the Nuggets. I just think, again, upside. What if Jamal Murray is Jamal Murray again? What if, you know, Michael Porter Jr. reaches that ceiling? If that's the case, you're already dealing with a back-to-back MVP who has almost single-handedly carried a roster. Like, I would even say, like, I haven't seen someone carry a roster like that since, like, LeBron took Sasha Pavlovich to the NBA Finals. Like, that's the level of, like, just putting the team on his back that Nikola Jokic has done the last season. So with some help now, I think 18-1, there's a reasonable chance they're the number 1 seed in the West.
That's why it was, we talked about it ad nauseum during the slate during the NBA season last year. As early as halfway through the year with all those injuries for Denver, I was, you know, I wish I'd done it myself, but I was shouting at people like, why would you not bet Jokic to win the MVP right now? Because it was just so clear. So long as he stayed healthy, it was a no-brainer. Like, there was no universe in which he shouldn't win the award based upon what he was doing with nothing, like with me, you, and Ulrich around him versus, you know, any other team that had help. And Jeff is going to jump in. We're going to get to some Thursday night football in a second. But just to finish up the point on the NBA, because you said something, and I don't want it to, just kind of get lost in the shuffle here. Like somebody had just earlier today, somebody texted me and said, boy, Celtics plus 600 odds to win the championship. Is that a good number? That seems like a good number. And I said, honestly, I think that's a terrible number. Like, they're right near the top. Like it would be in your best interest to say, you know what, new head coach, no Rob Williams. You're seeing if you have something in Sam Hauser, no Danilo Gallinari. They might get off to a slow start, actually. So maybe wait till they struggle a little bit and then bet them at a better number. And, to go back to what I was saying that you had acknowledged, you could look at the DraftKings Sportsbook here, look at the top 10, 12 teams and call out holes in any of them as to why they shouldn't win a championship. I mean, like the Clippers, what are George and Kawhi going to be after missing last season or much of last season in the case of George? Warriors, is this Draymond incident going to have any sort of fallout in the locker room? Is that going to mess up team chemistry? Is Clay going to get hurt again? The Celtics, we touched on that. The Nets, all the drama that comes along with that team. And does KD want out or does Kyrie want out? What's the COVID implications as it relates to Kyrie Irving? The Bucks, can they stay healthy? Obviously, as we learned last year, the Suns, is this the year that Chris Paul finally, goes off a cliff and all of a sudden they're a different team? Ayton, does he get hurt? The Sixers, how are Harden and Embiid going to coexist? Is Doc going to lose his job if he struggles? What kind of pressure is going to happen there? You look at the Lakers. I don't even need to outline all the problems with that team, obviously, and on and on. So you could, like as you said before, good year to place a, somewhat of a longer bet on a championship favorite. But let's get ourselves into some Thursday night football. Jeff, good to see you, buddy.
What's up, dudes?
Thanks for tuning into the program for a little while.
I was just listening to you turn Garion's Nuggets question into a Celtics answer somehow. I don't even know how you manage to do these things, but
it's a gift. It is a gift. Stop reading the Slack channel. All right, let's look. Part of putting off Thursday night football conversation is the Thursday night football game. Let's all be honest with ourselves here. This is a good night for people to not be able to find it on Amazon because you have Chicago and Washington. Now it's basically a pick 'em. Looking at the DraftKings Sportsbook, Washington is favored by a point on the road. There's not a lot of star power in this game, guys. You've got some absences like Logan Thomas is not going to play. John Dotson's not going to play. Justin Fields is going to be a popular captain tonight, but I don't think anybody actually trusts him. It's just, looking around at the options that you have, he makes sense. So does Curtis Samuel. So does, I don't know, David Montgomery, maybe. There aren't a lot. Like, Jeff, what's your outlook on this game? And should we expect it to be even somewhat decent with an over-under of 38 points?
No, it's like Mr. T in Rocky 3, man. I mean, the outlook is pain. Like, it's pain for everyone. I'm just looking at the weather forecast because it's actually pretty relevant today. And it's still pretty bad. Like, I think it's going to clear up a little bit by game time, but we're talking like 15-mile-plus-hour winds. So just to add like further, nonsense into like what is already going to be a low-scoring affair, it's just a really hard game. Honestly, it's a hard game for betting because like, you can say, oh, the money's coming in on the Bears, but then what? Okay, you're left with trusting Carson Wentz and like a depleted Commanders squad. I'm prone to just bet the Bears here. I think that they're better built for a scenario like this, where it's going to be an ugly game. They're going to run the ball with Montgomery. Fields is going to make some plays, and Wentz probably will shoot the Commanders in the foot at the end of the game. So that's kind of where I'm leaning. I really have just no idea about the number. I think with the bad weather, I would lean under as well. I do like Darnell Mooney in this spot for a player prop, but like, again, it's not something you have to bet. You don't have to bet this game. I'm going to, because I'm an idiot, but like the Mooney and the weather factor, like you should probably just stay away or maybe like even look at taking a couple unders. So
Gary, you tend to write about these showdown primetime slates. What's your view of this one? And, is this one of those games where kind of, as Jeff was just suggesting, especially with the weather, do we get all high and mighty about the DSTs and kickers tonight?
I enjoy that you phrase that. Like, I tend to write about these slates as if I'm not assigned them and then paid to write about them. It's just a hobby. I happen to write up these games when I see one that interests me.
And this one really jumps out.
This one, oh man, couldn't resist. I will say this, like right off the hop, when I wrote that article, and I mentioned that, it might be a good time to play Cairo Santos because he's actually looks really good this season. And the Bears, 21% of their drives this season, the third highest rate in the NFL, have ended in a field goal. But with the wins as strong as they are, suddenly the sort of let's just stack kickers and defenses. The kicker element of that doesn't seem so great anymore. So
there's nowhere to hide in this game. Like there's no place you can go, oh yeah, let's play kickers and defense. No, because like Garion said, it's windy and it's Soldier Field. So I don't
it's ugly. I think the one thing, and this would be my fantasy take and my betting take. And it does come with the giant asterisk, as Jeff sort of pointed out. And I think I even wrote this. I'm taking the Commanders, but that definitely is, you're assuming the risk that Carson Wentz doesn't do anything too stupid. You feel like he's going to do something stupid. He just can't do anything too stupid. But I think the only element of this game I feel confident in is the Commanders' defensive line versus the Bears' offensive line. It is almost comical how bad the Bears have been at protecting Justin Fields this season. There have only been 5 quarterbacks in the NFL sacked at least 18 times this season. Fields is obviously one of those 5 guys. The other 4 quarterbacks have dropped back at least 217 times to be sacked at that level. Fields has only dropped back 127 times. Their adjusted sack rate is 16.2%. That is the highest mark in the NFL. Second place is the Giants at 10.5%. Basically, the difference between the Giants level of bad and the Bears level of bad is the difference between the Giants and like the 10th place team in the NFL. That's how incompetent the Bears are with their offensive line right now. The Commanders are coming off a game where they racked up 5 sacks. I know this defensive line is not technically at full strength, but it still has some really nice pieces, and it begins and ends with Jonathan Allen. I just think they're going to put the Bears in some negative yardage positions. I think the Bears are going to be playing behind the sticks for most of this game. I think David Montgomery is a decent DFS play. I wouldn't captain him, but I think you could use him in a flex spot just because of the volume he's going to see. But he's also someone who's averaged less than 2 yards per carry in 2 of the 3 games he's actually been able to play this season. Like, this offensive line does not create holes. They do not protect their quarterback. At a certain point, I just think that Washington defense is going to control this game enough where, again, as long as Carson Wentz doesn't do anything too horrendously dumb, the Commanders should win this game.
Yeah.
So in the interest of time here, I'll ask both of you, but Jeff, you first. Who is your captain, your preferred captain in your personal optimal lineup tonight? And without filling out a full lineup, who are just some of the plays that you like best?
Fields is the captain for the simple fact he's got the rushing floor. But also, I mean, if the Bears are going to win this game, then like he's going to be overcoming all this, and he's going to be overcoming it either with his legs or with like passes to Mooney. So I think if the Commanders win, it's more likely Carson Wentz, just like Garion said, doesn't have to do much. I actually think that, Garion lays out a pretty good path to having the Commanders as a captain too. Like that's an interesting spot. Normally defense is just, but this is kind of a special circumstance. So that's interesting in itself, but yeah, for me, it's Fields.
How about some of the other plays that you like?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, Fields is coming off probably one of his best games of his career, to be honest. Like passing wise, is really efficient last week. And that's why I am interested in the Bears, because like if he can do that last week on the road, like, I mean, Washington isn't, they might bring pressure, but Fields played pretty good. So I would like to pair him with like either Mooney for sure, but I think Equanimeous St. Brown is interesting in the spot. I mean, he's been the downfield target for them. All it takes is one play at that price, and everybody is going to be on Diami Brown, who actually is he questionable? I'm not even sure if he's in. If he's playing, everyone's going to be in on a Diami Brown for the simple fact that Dotson's out. So I think Equanimeous St. Brown, low volume, slower paced game offers some intrigue.
Garion, your captain and some of your favorite plays.
Yeah. I would strongly consider captaining Commanders defense for all the reasons I laid out. I would also say Curtis Samuel is maybe not like the archetype of captain I would generally gravitate towards. He's not someone who has a super high ceiling, but in a game with a total this low, in a game where I really just don't know who has that highest ceiling aside from Justin Fields, who would be my number one Bears captain. Samuel's floor is just really appealing. I mean, there has not been a game this season where he has not out-targeted Terry McLaurin. I believe for the season as a whole, Samuel's team high target share is 23%. McLaurin's is just 16%. Samuel doesn't give you a lot of air yards. He's not your sort of like dictionary definition of a red zone target. Although I will say he does lead the team in red zone targets through 4 games. So do, opposing defenders. Carson Wentz is the quarterback, but Samuel just provides a really sturdy floor. And on a slate like this, that's actually pretty appealing. So I think Samuel's in the mix. Commanders defense, like I said, I like Fields. I like Montgomery. I would not captain him. I just don't think the ceiling's high enough. I think he's just someone who's going to get his 18 touches, and you hope maybe he falls over in the end zone at some point, but you can't bank on that considering how rare it is the Bears actually have a drive in the red zone. And yeah, I would fade Brown as well. If he plays just sheerly based on the performance he had last week, because he's a name people vaguely remember being a sleeper last year, there's just going to be too much buzz for someone who, yes, had 105 yards, but it took him maximizing his very, very small target share to do that. I just think Samuel and McLaurin are going to see so many more targets. I don't see the appeal of Brown. I think it's more likely he doesn't get a catch than it is he scores a touchdown. So,
let's not also forget that he's jumping up from $400 to $5,000. It's not like Brown's available to you for $2K, and you could say, all right, like I'll take a flyer on that. I mean, he's eating up considerable salary with, just a 1-game sample. Now, I guess in his, support, you don't have Dotson, you don't have Thomas. Theoretically, a few targets are heading his way, but that game looks a lot different without a 75-yard touchdown. To your point.
Definitely.
So,
and I would also probably steer clear of the Commanders' backfield, if I'm being honest. I know we had reports that Brian Robinson is going to start this game. Congratulations. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing, but starting a game at running back in the NFL doesn't mean a whole lot anymore. With what we saw in the preseason, it was trending towards being Robinson's job anyway. But if what we saw last week was any indication, none of the 3 running backs on the Commanders drew more than 26 offensive snaps. None of them had double-digit touches. I think Robinson could be a guy who maybe ekes out 11 to 12 carries in this game, but if he's not going to be involved in the passing game, I don't really care. And it's not like he or Gibson or McKissick are like a value play either. They're all priced well above 6K. One of them might end up being in the optimum lineup. I understand that, but the shell game you have to play to pick which one of these guys is actually more viable than the other, I just don't want to do it.
Jeff,
if people is just like a shell game. Like after you get down under McKissick, it's just like, I mean, you're just like looking, you're just guessing. I mean, it feels like a big guessing game underneath.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because that's the direction I wanted to head. If let's say, like Jeff said, his captain's Fields and he's going to be the chalky captain tonight. Let's say most people are captaining Justin Fields, and then you're saying, I still want to pay up, right? Like I want Curtis Samuel's floor. I want David Montgomery's floor. Maybe it's a showdown, so I want my exposure to Carson Wentz. Well, at that point in time, you have very little money left to spend. Gary, and you already made the case for the Commanders defense. You could slide them in, but at that point in time, now you're really dumpster diving. You're looking at and I don't know if the money actually checks out on all this, but you're looking,
because we can talk about Smith-Marset.
Well, I mean, you're looking at him, you're looking at Dante Pettis, you're looking at Cam Sims, maybe a couple of these $200 guys, like what is, at $200 making his debut, could you argue N'Keal Harry and them trying to just find him on a deep ball as a punt play? You know what I mean? So who is your favorite or favorites from this extreme value category?
I mean, I think Cam Sims is interesting. He's been with the team for a while. His snap count should go up. I mean, he obviously hasn't been playing a ton, but Dotson being out, I mean, I don't think that, again, we just talked about Damon Brown. I mean, He's banged up. Oh, and actually Logan Thomas is out too, isn't he? So I mean,
Right.
like that's another target for the Commanders down. Like I think it's actually a good spot for Sims just to kind of come in, play a few downs out of the slot, potentially get like 3 or 4 targets. He's a pretty good player too. I mean, he's stayed with the Commanders this whole time. When a player is like that, just sort of trolling around as like the 3rd or 4th option, the team likes him for a reason. So yeah, I don't mind that.
Sims had 60% of the snaps last week, by the way.
Yeah, but it was Brown who got the glory,
Right.
so to speak. So
Right.
again, going to the other side of that duo is absolutely fine this week, in my opinion.
Garion,
Yeah.
did you want to talk Smith Marset?
I mean, I don't really want to talk Smith Marset, but again, Showdown is that unique beast where you're kind of just like, look, if I need to put him into a lineup to make the money work, if I want to play with some top end guys in the other 5 slots, and I need someone who I just know will be on the field for a certain amount of snaps, and his snap count is trending up, which is, not only good to see in general, but good to see for someone who is as young as Smith Marset is. He's not a rookie, but he feels like a rookie. He's probably going to play like, I don't know, 25 snaps tonight, and maybe he gets 2 to 3 targets. I know he came up with, the play that cost the Bears the game, quote unquote, in week 5, but at least he was involved. So, at this price point, you really only need him to catch a pass, and you're looking at 3x value. So if that's the kind of lineup build you want to go with, like a real stars and scrubs approach, Smith Marset is just one of that handful of guys who could be your scrub because, like I said, at the very least, he's going to line up for a snap tonight.
I plan to, I know I mentioned this in passing, guys. I plan to make a bunch of lineups tonight because what the heck, let's have some fun. I have to have at least some exposure to N'Keal Harry, and it's not Patriots bias, because if it were, that would be reason to not roster him. I just believe that, very little has worked for the Bears so far this year, very little. So at least if you have a guy who is capable of opening up your offense in theory, and I'm talking about like one big play for $200, maybe if you're lucky, it's a touchdown. I'm not talking about the guy going off and having 100 yards or something like that. But if you're looking at $200 punt plays that could theoretically give you, 2 catches for 60 yards and maybe a score, he's one of the guys whose direction I would be looking in, Gary.
Again, you just want someone who is going to take the field. That is literally the only qualification for viability at this price point.
Yeah.
Being on the field in this game is sadly, it's massive. It's true.
It's a low bar.
Having a heartbeat.
I'm curious too. Let's say, and we're going to get out of here in a second, but is this, the screen's up in front of you. Let's say I'm just curious how much money would be left over. If I had a Commanders play and the captain, like Garion talked about.
Don't go building lineups.
I'm not building a full lineup. I'm not going to do that. I'm thinking in this dream world where I had kickers and defenses. What kind of money does that leave me with? You still have an average of anybody you want.
Yeah.
That's what you have. So you'd have to be expecting just the ugliest weather game you could imagine to justify trying to win $1 million that way.
Look, legitimately, I'm going to be watching Amazon's pregame show to be like, tell me about, show me the footage of Santos attempting a 45-yarder and having it just knuckle off into the grandstands. I need to see that because I want to invest in kickers tonight. And I probably need to see something that definitive to get me off of that track.
Right.
I think that this game, if you do get a good read on the weather beforehand, you could potentially gain a pretty big advantage, whether it's going kickers when everyone's not, whether it's avoiding the kickers or maybe going heavy on the pass game if the weather dies down. It feels like it's going to be dictated a little bit by the weather because the teams are so bad. They're not going to overcome 15-mile-per-hour winds. So it really is one of those spots. You should be paying attention to the pregame kicks, the weather reports. Maybe they'll get somebody down on the field. I don't know.
Let's just hope this is
call your friend in Washington or in Chicago.
Yeah, just don't give us a game with a dozen punts. That's
I don't
what
know.
I really
Apparently,
that's exactly what we're gonna get. This is
the spot if we get a game that bad, which would be pretty good television.
Or Amazon television. Make
Yes.
sure you find it on your smart TVs or your cell phones. Thanks to Eamon,
There's
our
on regular
producer.
television in Canada. Just saying.
Daniel, our technical director, Moose for hopping in for a little football conversation, Jeff Ulrich, Gary and Thorne, who will check out a little bit more baseball today before being glued to his TV set tomorrow. And I am Adam Kaufman. We will have the Sweat tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Eastern as usual until noon. Then the Slate, same time as today, right around 5:15 after the 4 o'clock Madden Sim. We'll talk baseball. We'll look ahead to the main slate, the classic, and from a betting perspective as well. NFL coming up over the weekend. Maybe if there's time, mix in some more NBA there, but probably heavy baseball.